There. Yes, but we'll be fine. We'll yeah, we'll be fine. Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm doing well. Thank you.
All right. Good evening, everyone. This is the regular meeting of Garden City's Planning and Zoning Commission for Wednesday, May 24th, 2023. We're all good to go on our audio check and recording check. The record could show that Commissioners Brown, Commissioners Shepherd, and Commissioner Montoya is in the room, and Commissioner Wild is on Zoom. Okay, can we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. For staff, any changes to the agenda?
Chairman, there are no changes to the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That takes us to our consent agenda, which so far contains the minutes from our April 27th, 2023 meeting. Also, though, from time to time, we use the consent agenda for items on the agenda that might have complete applications. There's no public testimony wanting to be offered, and a few other things. So we will see if our CUP item on the agenda might be applied to the consent agenda. But in order to determine that, I have to ask a couple of questions. So is there anyone in the audience who would like to give public testimony on that particular item, which is CUP FY 2023-7? Okay, so I don't see that anybody wants to provide testimony on that. Is the applicant present, Mr. Kearns? Zoom, maybe? Mr. Kearns? Okay. So we can go ahead, Jenna.
Chairman, you certainly could continue the item. It's probably recommendable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would recommend to continue the item.
Yeah, so with the applicant not present for that item on the agenda, we will continue that to our date certain of our next meeting. Oh my gosh.
June 21st.
Thank you very much. June 21st, 2023. So that will be our second item on the consent agenda. So I think we're ready to go with a motion for our consent agenda.
Chairman,
Commissioner Montoya.
I move for approval of the minutes from the April 27th, 2023 meeting, as well as the continuance of CUP FY 2023-0007 to a date certain
June 21st.
June 21st, 2023.
Thank you. We have a motion. Is there a second?
I would second.
Motion second. All those in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
And aye. Okay.
Mr. Chair, this is Matt Wild. I'll just note for the record my abstention from that. I was not present for that meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Wild. Noted. Okay, we will move to our next item on the agenda, which was continued from our last meeting. It's SAP FY 2023-1 River Club Specific Area Plan. Trevor Nickel requesting a specific area plan for 22.68 acres located at 6515 West State Street. Since we are continuing this from our last meeting, we left off at public testimony. So public testimony is still open. We will continue with that this evening. We'll start with that this evening. But a few notes with regard to that. There are basically 3 items that were, for lack of a better word, I guess, new to the application. So there's a delegation of authority, which has come up. The draft condition red lines, which were submitted by the applicant. That document is basically a document that the commission uses in its deliberations. So those 2 things will not be heard via public testimony tonight. The third thing, the proposed changes to the 3rd phase was also an update to the application. If you wish to provide public testimony on the 3rd phase changes, proposed changes to the 3rd phase, we can hear testimony on that tonight. Okay. So we will begin with that then. If there is anybody that does wish to provide public testimony on that item, there is a sign-up form over on the table underneath the screen over there. And we'll start with that. And while, if anybody's thinking about whether or not they want to do that, I will go through sort of some information just to kind of keep in the back of our mind as we hear this item and any item. It is a quasi judicial hearing. We are a recommending body to city council, so what we do here will be only a recommendation to city council. Okay.
Scroll down. I'll get to your presentation.
And we, as decision makers up here, as we consider our recommendation to city council, it is our job to apply factual criteria to determine compliance with applicable regulations. So, and as we mentioned last time, only in-person testimony will be allowed. Spokespersons must be approved by the chairman. You do need to sign up to speak.
Okay.
And the hearing will be conducted in accordance with Garden City Code 8-6A and Resolution 1053-18.
Can you just?
When you're called upon to provide testimony, speak into the microphone at the podium and address the commission. We'll need your name and address for the record. And then public testimony is limited to 3 minutes. If you are a spokesperson, you will have a max of 15 minutes. But so if you're representing 2 people and yourself, so it's 3 minutes per person, that would be 9 minutes. Okay. Any documentations, presentations, photos, documents, etc., must have been made part of the record 7 days or more in advance. And of course, some notes on conduct. We do have reserved seating up here. If there's a handful of people that want to provide testimony, you can take these chairs up front. And then only your turn will come once the chair has called you up front. Of course, respectful conduct and testimony are expected, and then we are not allowing signs or posters in the room this evening. So after we hear public testimony, the applicant will then be able to step forward and provide a rebuttal. And then we will have staff come up again to address the commission. At that point, we will close the public hearing, and then the commissioners will deliberate on the application and come to a motion at the end. So that's kind of how we're going to flow tonight on this. Did we get any signups while I was doing all that to do public testimony?
Chairman, just point of order, the
Sure.
applicant has requested just a brief introduction to their proposed draft condition amendment to the master plan prior to the testimony, so that the testimony can be on point.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good with that.
Thank you very much. Joanne Butler, 967 East Park Center Boulevard, representing the applicant. Yeah, I do wanted to just go over the proposal in case anybody in the audience hadn't seen it. We know some people have, but some haven't. And so we'll just go over that real quickly. With all the work that we have done with our neighbors and with the design review consultants and the staff, we were quite comfortable with the original application that we had addressed the neighbors' concerns, especially those over on North Fair Oaks Place where they didn't want pedestrian or bike access coming onto that public road. So we agreed with that, but the response from Mr. Leroy and his clients in letters and in his April testimony was that the only design change that was acceptable to them was that all of this phase 3 had to be eliminated. So we asked to meet with he and his clients to try to understand what exactly they felt was mitigation that would mitigate the effects of phase 3 on their homes. We were not able to meet. So we had to work on our own. We did provide them with this. We had wanted to meet before we provided it to the city, but they had not wanted to meet. We then went and tried to eliminate townhomes, and I'll go through this drawing a little bit, eliminate townhomes, add additional green space, create more separation between houses, and reduce the project area to eliminate any possible connection to North Fair Oaks Place. So what you can see on this drawing and best way to look at it is that the black lines where you have, I'll look at the very far to the right, where the distance of the original project was 94 feet from a home. And I think on the second sheet, you have the original drawing from the original master plan. That's been increased to 178 feet. An additional acre has been removed from the boundary of the specific area plan. 7 townhomes have been removed from this east end. And those additional townhomes were also removed near Mr. Patterson's house. Mr. Patterson was referenced by Mr. Leroy as being, it was referenced as he was very close at 82 feet between his home and the project boundary, which is a little hard to understand because he was separated by the entire golf course right there, or it's all golf course property. But that area has been increased to 175 feet. You can see the home further just next to him, further to the west. The distance has been increased to 216 feet. We finally did get the chance to meet with Mr. Leroy and his clients, but they told us what it would take to be productive in a meeting was only if we came to the meeting to say that we would eliminate all of phase 3. At the meeting, they told us that this particular example was only a first start. They later wrote to say that the proposal was a PR Hail Mary meant to divide the neighbors. I don't know what that means, but I want to tell this commission that the proposal was definitely made in good faith to address the concerns of the neighbors. If this area were developed under the existing R2 zoning, none of these substantial buffers would exist. So we really have attempted to listen to these neighbors, but in fact, we're not sure they really want mitigation. They don't want the next door property owner to use the property at all, and they hope the city will help them make that happen. They want the elimination of phase 3. So as Mr. Leroy and his clients come up to address this good faith effort by the applicant, we think it's only fair that they be asked and they tell the commission in detail and not with vague statements why they believe this proposal does not mitigate and address their concerns. So we'll be happy to listen to all of the testimony, and then we'll save our time for rebuttal after that, and then rebut all of the testimony at one time. Thank you. Unless there are any questions of the commissioners.
Thank you very much. Do we have questions for the applicant? Commissioner Montoya.
Thank you. I do have a question for you. And so what are you anticipating doing with that area that you're no longer going to be putting the townhomes on?
That will, the lighter green area? Yes, that would remain with the golf course.
And is it gonna be part of the golf course?
Yes.
All right.
And Mr. Gustafson he's got all sorts of ideas as to how it can be used, but it would remain part of the golf course. So different, to make that connection disconnect very clear.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions for the applicant? Okay. Thank you again. That said, we will move to testimony.
Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to accept Ms. Butler's invitation. As a
Sir,
certain, if my paperwork's in order.
what's that?
If my paperwork is in order, I'd
Okay.
be glad to
Okay,
accept the opportunity to speak as a representative.
okay. I will call people up here. Let's see, so I've got 3 forms here. And I'll just name the speakers so you guys could come up and take seats in the front. I've got John Livingston. You will have 12 minutes.
I only need, I think 6, so maybe that'll be good.
Okay,
for
well,
everybody.
just hold on. I'm gonna call up everybody so they can be up here in front. Tina Ellis is representing one person, so Tina will have 6 minutes.
I'm actually representing 2.
2.
There should be one there.
I have you and one other person on the sign up sheet. So that's
Let's see.
okay. Thank you. And then Ron Bush. I've got three people in total, including Mr. Bush, so he will have 9 minutes as well. I didn't get a sign up form for you.
Should have one for Dave Leroy.
Okay.
There's some coming, we're
Oh,
sorting.
I got you. Okay, okay. All right. So let's start with Mr. Livingston. So again, you have 12 minutes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank you again for your time. My name is John Livingston. I live at 6273 North Fair Oaks Place, Garden City, Idaho, 83703. I stand opposed to this amendment and the amendment to the amendment, if you will, that's just been presented tonight for the first time, and that we just got to see 6 days ago. On March 29th of this year, the applicant had a meeting with the objectors in the office of Stoll Reeves downtown. All attorneys were present representing the applicant, and Mr. Leroy represented the objectors. At that meeting, we asked if we provided a remedy in real estate to how this 1 acre of land at the end of Fair Oaks Place could be handled. The concern we had was that access to the cul-de-sac where we live needed to be secured in perpetuity. In other words, that there would be no further intrusion upon our cul-de-sac by any more development or any more designs by any city agencies, including the Idaho County Highway District, or even as proposed tonight in the amendment to this application. That request was rejected by the applicant unequivocally. And so we went for 2 months and we got to this stage 6 days before this meeting, and we were provided with this map. Now, I take full responsibility for some of the reason for this delay. I was on vacation camping, did not have cell phone coverage, did not have internet access. And the very moment that I got home, 15 minutes later, I returned the phone call to Mr. Gustafson, who then sent an email to me And I responded to Mr. Gustafson in what I thought was a private discussion that we had agreed to on March 29th to have all our discussions done in private. That email has subsequently been published on Safe Plantation. I have responded to that email on our webpage, Preserve Plantation. And it's very important that everybody sees the details of both what was alleged about my behavior and my response to that. It was just published and posted at 1600 today. Our position has been unequivocal. This access here is not only a Hail Mary, my words, this access is draconian and Machiavellian because it allows the applicant, who is the owner, to control access to this cul-de-sac in perpetuity without the city fathers ever being able to have a say as to how that access will be used. It secures his position to further increase access to our cul-de-sac. That's not right. And the city fathers should always be involved in this process. You represent us, not a real estate developer or a country club. Our position has been unchanged. We have on numerous occasions offered remedies in real estate without the applicant ever responding to us. Our position is this: the master declaration contract is operative, number one. The SAP, both as amended and the amendment to the amendment, is not consistent with state statute, the SUP statute in state law, and it's not consistent with the Garden City Code. You will hear more about that. But the most important issue that was identified in July of 2022 by the city attorney is we have not resolved the ownership issues of this property as required by the master declaration.
I don't mean to be rude to interrupt, but that is one of the things that is not on the table with public testimony. It's only that amendment to the third phase. So
Okay.
that ownership issue is something that we've taken off the table tonight. So thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
I'm not done yet.
Well, that's fine.
Okay.
I just wanted to say we didn't.
Thank you.
Okay.
The way the master declaration applies to that is that in the master declaration, it requires any owner on the plantation property, including the river club, has to disclose their owners. And the reason for that is very simple.
And that's so.
The reason will explain everything. Okay. So I'm opposed to this. I'm opposed to the amendment, and I'm opposed to the amendment to the amendment. It's draconian and Machiavellian. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, Tina Ellis, you are up again. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. I'm Tina Ellis and I live at 3430 North Plantation River Drive. And I'm proud to say that we do not have a public easement through to the green belt. And it has taken a while to establish that, but I believe that has been established. What I'd like to say about Plantation is it's a jewel. It's a jewel in Boise and in Idaho. It's been here forever, and we've experienced people coming in from other areas with other opinions about what it is we need and should have, and removing our history to bring in a development sort of like this. And then they leave town and they never to return again, never to live in Boise. And they leave with the money, and they leave that they've made, and they leave us to pay the taxes on the buildings that they've established. So I am a resident of Garden City. I do vote, and I do have friends that vote. And we're looking very carefully at the situation between people, different people, and how this all is going down. One thing I'd like to say is that as far as a resident at Plantation, the developers that have come in have shown very, very little respect for the homeowners that are there and that have invested a lot of money to be in Plantation. And I strongly feel that this third phase particularly is going to affect the property value for lots of people. And we're not going to be the people that arrive and leave. These are people that have lived here for 30 plus years. I know that I remember this when it was first being developed and the problems they had to go through to do it and how beautifully they handled that and developed each section of Plantation River Drive. I know that all of the traffic that we have on State Street right now is only augmented by 750 units and the probably 100 at least cars that are going to be pouring onto State Street from just this idea, the third part of this development. So I'm really hoping that people will stop trading our integrity and beautiful gyms in our gym state for money. And that quit listening to what people say you should have. Well, maybe we don't need millions of dollars spent on a library in Boise. Maybe we don't need to lose the one thing that after you have had a long day and you're driving home and you can look at Plantation Golf Course and it's just a relief that we don't have a wall that's real similar to the brand new blue car wash that is just a solid block of that just covers any kind of view of the mountains or, you know, we are not wanting to have a concrete street that's so hot you can't even walk on it because there's no air to circulate. So I would like to say that I see moving the third part of this development to where they're suggesting now is only just kicking it down the road. The problems go with it wherever they're going to put it because it's not appropriate for Plantation. There's still the problems with the school bus, they're the private streets, and the bus stop that's in the front. It'll be real interesting to see just how many people use the bus. During the green period for me, I chose to use the bus for 6 months. And I can tell you, I know the routes and I know the people and I know what happens when a bus breaks down. If somebody throws up on the bus and then the bus is late and, you know, there's a lot about taking the bus. And I met great people on the bus, but I don't see it ever in Boise as being like it most likely is in other large cities because we're not a large city and we don't aspire to be a large city. So I would like you to take into account that all the homeowners that are here and have invested time. And I first started here in Plantation when I was 25 years old, wanting to live here. And now I live here and I want to protect it. I don't want it ruined. So I am very against this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Okay, Ron Bush will have 9 minutes, and I'll just say again that testimony
Focus it.
only on the third
Can we focus
phase.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, Joanne Butler, well, there's so much that the applicant needs to rebut. I just hope that we can focus on the particular issue so that we
So
know
you
what.
will be able to rebut.
Okay.
You will
Thank
be
you.
able to rebut.
Thank you.
So I'll just say this right now. Let's just have the person giving testimony be the speakers or the commissioners or staff or anybody else with the city. Okay, and I think all of us up here will appreciate that very much if we can do that. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Bush, you have 9 minutes.
A couple of questions before I begin and my time begins, please. First, at the last meeting, I had asked that Mr. Gustafson be required to provide his residence address, his legal residence, where he files taxes from. Same request is made of everyone else. The applicant requested last month or the month before that the persons involved in opposing the application represented by Mr. Leroy be required to all identify themselves. Fair is fair. So I'm asking that you require him to do that tonight. Will you do that?
I'm sorry.
Mr. Gustafson should be required to identify for the record his legal residence.
So-
He uses the address of the golf course.
Yes, so that is a matter that that is not on the table from a public testimony standpoint tonight.
But that's the
So-
same question you ask of everyone that approaches the podium, but he chooses not to answer it.
Okay, you can proceed with your testimony about the third phase.
All right,
'Cause we're
second-
not discussing that item.
Respectfully, Mr. Chairman, I think that's wrong. Mr. Chairman, I also have a question about the decision to not allow any testimony in regard to ownership issues. You'll recall at the last hearing, and this is Mr. Wadhams, you may want to inquire of him, quasi judicial proceedings. When someone is precluded from providing evidence to the tribunal, which you are, then that person has the right to make a proffer of what would be offered.
Do you have testimony, sir, about the third phase?
Yes.
Okay, let's move to that,
All right, then,
please.
all right, then I simply want to make a record that I've asked to make a proffer of that, and and the record will reflect that I've been denied that opportunity.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. For the record, it's been noted, sir. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Chairman and
Thank you, Mr.
Commissioners, thank you for your time on this application. It's no doubt one of the most contentious and thorny applications that you've had reason to take on. It's a lot of effort. And we count on you to have examined all of these things in order to make an assessment of this record. We've spent a lot of time working on these matters as well. And so this application and all of its volume and issues suddenly is remodeled like a chameleon a week ago and presented to this board as if it is a solution to a problem. Well, first of all, we haven't had sufficient time to address those contentions. Some of them have bubbled a little bit already about, well, you take that out, and then what does that really mean going forward? All these questions would remain open. But we haven't been able to study it and articulate it as fully as it deserves. Moreover, the staff's addendum was to the staff report asked this board to keep intact the recommendation that there be connection between the development and Fair Oaks. So all of those harms that would flow from that are still sitting there like Damocles' sword over the necks of the people who live in the plantation subdivisions. It simply isn't fair to us, nor is it fair to you as decision makers to be asked to make decisions. Remember that state law and your oath requires you to consider, study, absorb, understand all of these issues. And it isn't simply that particular piece. It also is importantly, as Dr. Livingston described, the issues relating to whether an SAP is appropriate here, whether it complies with city code, the comprehensive plan. And this is simply a diversion. It's like the old game of finding the pea under the walnut. And so we count on you, and I stand here weary as you are because of the time, effort, and thought that it takes to sort through these things. And I ask you, have you had enough time to read every single piece that's in the record? Some of it's redundant, but a whole lot of it isn't. And when we had our last hearing, I fully expected that there would be questions of me about the many points, both of law and fact, that I had raised in the submissions that I had given to you. I'm not even sure they made it to you. So I plead that you, and on behalf of all of the people that have opposed this application, that you take the time to really go through it piece by piece, all the things that you have to rule upon, that you have to decide in ruling upon this application that the law requires of you, and have a full conversation about it. I can't understand how that can be done in minutes after a hearing such as this. It seems like it ought to be something that takes place in maybe several hours at least, that you really walk through it, because you have to be the ones to vote on that and attest. And the proposals that have been given to you, when you said that there's not going to be discussion about the draft the draft recommendations for findings of fact and conclusions of law, but I'd simply say, read those to see whether you think that the position, the arguments of the opponent have really been laid out there. I would submit to you that they haven't. All right. Yours is a responsibility in our government that is, as I said at the beginning, difficult. It's one that requires all sorts of time. I simply ask that you, when you approach your decision, in a way that minimizes rationalizations. The more one rationalizes to reach a result, the more likely it is that the result is not the right one. Moreover, I'd ask you to ask yourself, what better evidence is there that the comprehensive plan is not satisfied here in terms of compatibility with existing neighborhoods, long existing neighborhoods, and impact upon existing residents, than the fact that you have all of these many people who have spoken up so stridently and so eloquently and so carefully about why that isn't the case here, why the application doesn't support that. And then I'd simply ask you to ask yourselves, which of the decisions that you have before you, whether to approve this SAP application or to deny it, is the one that will keep you awake at night if you were to make that particular decision. We count on you to enforce the protections that our city code provides, and that's why you have so many people that have asked you to do just that. I genuinely thank you for the time and attention that you're giving to this, and I appreciate the time. I appreciate the time that others have given to me.
Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Leroy, you can take the podium, and I'm going to call up before your time starts, I'll call up another handful of names so they can come up and take the vacant seats up here. Dan Holler, Mark Johnson, and Dave Boyce, or Boyle. I'm sorry if I said that wrong. All right. Mr. Leroy, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Dave Leroy, attorney at law, P.O. Box 193, Boise, Idaho. representing the three clients that have previously been identified in the record. Mr. Chairman, as to the amended map, we appreciate the efforts of the applicant, the developer, to make the effort that they have and to have a dialogue with us. I'm sure Ms. Butler will amend her earlier remarks to the extent that they didn't suggest that we were eager and willing and able and cordial in meeting her as soon as Mr. Livingston returned to town. And we did have a brief discussion with them where this map was presented as a fait accompli just before it was filed at the last day of the last hour. For that reason, Mr. Chairman, in addition to these oral remarks tonight, I had sent you a letter requesting that we have an open comment period for written comments so that we can include the 66 people who testified previously against this proposal, and perhaps even the 19 people who testified in favor of it would like to be heard. I think that would be fair before a decision is reached here. As to the revised phase 3 map, I suggest that a fair look at it suggests that it's merely illusory as to the elimination of a connection to the neighborhood. We do indeed appreciate that two of the structures were moved back 84 and 85 feet. We appreciate the fact that 7 townhouses were eliminated. And we appreciate that it arguably or theoretically creates a separation of ownership as noted in one corner. On the other hand, it allows the applicant to show that they were listening when all of the neighbors severely objected to the kind of connection that both the applicant and even with greater vigor, your own staff suggested needed to be had to North Fair Oaks for both pedestrians and bikes, and arguably for fire trucks and school buses. But now, in the face of this amendment, your own staff making this an illusory suggestion suggests in your revised findings that the revised finding 13A be amended to suggest that the east end of phase 3 is a quote connection to the golf course. And secondly, that it would allow for a potential future connection to North Fair Oaks. What kind of a suggestion is that by your staff, and what kind of a solution, if that's what you would have put in your findings, would that be in terms of making anything but a mockery of this suggestion? Let me talk a little bit too about the fact that the proposed ownership of this 1 acre is in the golf course. Well, we already know from the entirety of the material that has been submitted, there is no golf course ownership independent of Lincoln at this time. They own it all. And so are they suggesting that they'll create a new LLC, all of which raises again the ownership issues triumphed by Mr. Bush in the earlier materials. Let me make a second comment about one of the issues before you tonight. The agency comment by the Boise School District confirms that student pickup currently is now for the neighbors' children who are already in the existing plantation neighborhood at West Plantation Lane and North Fair Oaks Place for the existing children. That confirms that the pickup, it also confirms that there will not be any pickup within private streets, all of which are in 1, 2, and 3 of the phases. Thus, this literally requires children to walk across the open 1 acre of golf course to get to the existing school depository for those children and existing school pickup for those children. Once again, an illusory suggestion. And it also, however, contains an alternative suggestion in the school district letter that there be created a bus pullout lane on State Street in phases 1 or 2, or on the alternative, a public street is implied within the area. Thus, once again, this ordinance is not ripe for the solution of that problem, and any lack of a solution for that problem merely consigns children to walk across the open acre to North Fair Oaks Place. Finally, let me make a note about the parking adjustment. Your staff has suggested that, and the applicant has suggested in an admission that the parking has been previously inadequate, that the parking increased from 1.25 spaces for a unit of 2 persons to a parking space ratio of 2 spaces per 2-person unit. I estimate there are approximately 372 2-bedroom units in this. Thus, I would calculate that that increases the number of new spaces on site, for which we have no plan, at 277.5 new spaces, up to a nearly 1,400 total spaces. That reduces, we're appreciative of that, of course, but it only partially reduces and mitigates the likelihood of overflow parking in the neighborhood. And in addition, it's a tacit admission that this is not a transit-oriented activity node. Instead, once again, it's merely a large proposal for a multifamily housing that had inadequate parking and is now attempting to get back in the game when neighbors have complained about the logical effect of that. Ms. Butler asked me to suggest what mitigation you should find here. What mitigation would be appropriate, if not just this proposition? Let me answer that specifically. Number one, if you are going to use an SAP at this site, then you need to eliminate phase 3, which therefore eliminates the illusory issues that this map appreciated that it was drawn, but it really offers no solution, as I've just explained. You need to eliminate phase 3 if you're going to eliminate access and the problems through North Fair Oaks. Number 2, you need to right size phases 1 and 2. Number 3, you need to address all of the unaddressed issues. Remember, you're making an ordinance here, not merely hearing an application. And those are school access, fire access, floodplain issues, sewer access. There's no agreement from Boise City to accept any sewer for an SAP at this site. And you need to address the 2 unaddressed issues, totally unaddressed issues: the master declaration and complying with the master declaration through legitimate HOA procedures. And finally, the issue of questionable ownership, again, is triumphed by Mr. Bush. We do appreciate the applicant's effort, though late and though inadequate and though illusory, to hear the neighborhood complaints. We ask that you not only hear the neighborhood complaints, but just as you suggested at the outset, Mr. Chairman, take very seriously your recommendatory obligation and make sure when you recommend an ordinance to the city council, you have done exactly what you promised to do. Find facts, all of the relevant facts, applying them to the ordinance, to the comprehensive plan, and in so doing, we believe that you will either reject this proposal now or send it back for more work. And I do ask for a 2-week period for comment, written comment by the people who couldn't be here tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, next up, and thank you again, sir. Dan Holler. Dan, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Dan Holler, and I live with my family and have for the last 29 years at 6254 North Fair Oaks Place and Plantation. I stand before you having seen this information just less than a week ago, and I think it warrants further public scrutiny. I think that there needs to be additional time out of respect to our citizens, our Garden City neighbors, and those who are opposed to this, as well as those who would like to determine further information as to their opposition or support for this. This is an 11th hour movement by the developers to take your eye off the ball, so to speak, as to the issues associated with the connection to North Fair Oaks Place. And I don't believe, speaking as a 29-year-old resident of Plantation subdivision, that it alleviates the concerns that our neighbors have talked about. And I don't think there are assurances from the developer. They cannot guarantee that there will be a connection at some point to North Fair Oaks Place. That, in my mind, is the reason that they adhere to ownership of that 1 acre parcel. When in reality, it would be better if it was closed off from the standpoint of selling it to a private property owner and building a home there to emulate, if you will, what is occurring on Charleston Place, where there is another residence there and they don't have that issue of connection. With regard to high density, I don't believe this area is applicable to an SAP. We've talked about that before. I'm on record of being opposed to particularly this section of phase 3. I think if you look at the details associated with an SAP and the comprehensive plan and the State Street Corridor study, you will come to the realization that particularly this third phase is not applicable, not appropriate up against North Fair Oaks Place, even with it being now pushed back a little bit because of their concern, or at least trying to alleviate in their minds what the concerns are among residents. But your staff as well has already indicated they would prefer to see some type of connection there. So for the developer to stand before you and say there's not going to be a connection, I don't think that is something that is defined as being forthcoming or transparent. And I think that's what our public deserves. So thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Mark Johnson. Mark Johnson is up next. And sir, you'll have 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm also representing Jason Dovis and Cheryl Scott at 4750 Savannah Lane. Does that change anything? I can do it in 3 if not.
Yeah, they're not on the list here, so.
Okay,
if
all
you-
right. Mr. Chairman, Planning and Zoning Commissioners, my former members, colleagues in the media watching this tonight. Hi. One thing I did not get a chance to mention last month when I was up here was the fact that I and everyone else in the plantation neighborhood is in lockstep with the concerns of our friends and neighbors on Fair Oaks. I live on Plantation Lane, 220 yards away from Fair Oaks, and I, like them, understand the need for a setback and the need to create separation between here and here. So that's why when I saw the setback plan, the new plan, my wife and I applauded. I had asked and talked with Lincoln and Will about this after that meeting, and they got it. And there is no way to access Fair Oaks now. What they haven't mentioned is this is also a stream that goes here. So for kids to access the bus stop, they're going to have to swim across a 10-foot long stream. To give some perspective, we built the house on the right side of 17 at Plantation in 1999. It was a 2-story and still is, and it blocked the view of the foothills from our neighbors on the other side of the tee box 129 feet away. And I told Tom Newen at the time, I'm sorry to block your view. And he said, thank God it's a house and not a street with condos. He was totally good with it then. The setback from the Kruger house and the Zenovich house is 220 feet away. Thank God there's not going to be a street there. The biggest concern of the neighborhood has been addressed by Lincoln and Will. No access to Fair Oaks from this property, and that is assured by this plan. It's a difference between getting this compromise and this act of good faith to let this happen and keep our golf course, or prevent this from happening and having that street built between the Newman house and the Johnson house on 17 and losing all 125 acres of our open space golf course. We have open space. It's a golf course. Sure, it's a private country club, but it is open space. We are protecting that by allowing this to happen and giving concessions to those folks and my friends and neighbors on Fair Oaks. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, Dave, and again, Boyle or Boyce, I can't tell if that's an L or a C. Oh, okay, okay. Mike Nero. Okay. All right. Mary Ann Kronk. Okay, okay. Thank you. Christine Simon. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Danielle Ores? Am I saying that? I'm sorry? You're not? Okay. Okay, Kathleen Blah, and I do have your letter here that will be added to the record. And I guess we'll need to read that one in to the record, correct? Because it's
Chairman, if it's related to the items that you designated as being open for testimony, yes.
okay, okay. All right, so we'll do that at the end where applicable. And then I think that's all I have, unless you guys got a couple more or any more. Okay, okay. I'm going to review your letter real quick, because again, we're only addressing the third phase with public testimony. Okay, thank you for taking the time to write this letter. I don't see anything specific that addresses the third phase. So I guess we can add it to the record, but I won't read it into the record at this meeting. Okay. So now we're at the point of the applicant being able to provide their rebuttal. So we can proceed with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joanne Butler, again, 967 East Park Center Boulevard. I will start my rebuttal, but before I do, just to respond on this particular, this is not an amendment. This was a response to the testimony to remove all of phase 3. There is no access to North Fair Oaks Place, the public street right adjacent with this plan. For the commission, we felt we made that disconnect with the original plan. We talked about it. We said there would be fence, that we were not promoting any pedestrian or bicycle access. And of course, ACHD also recommended no vehicular access. It's really up to the commission. This is a proposal that we thought was responding to the concerns of the neighbors. What I heard tonight was that this was a diversion, or people didn't really say anything, or it didn't work. So all I can say to the commission from the applicant is, if you want to go back to the original application, this is a proposal to you to hopefully address. I didn't get from the neighbors that it was going to do anything. So we'll leave this with the commission. We are fine with either, maintaining that disconnect with the original application or creating even more separation as we proposed here. So, again, good evening to the commission, again, representing the applicant. With me to present rebuttal testimony is Bob Taunton. We will, he's basically my backstop. If I forget something or trip over my words, I'll make sure that he catches me. Also with me here tonight is Trevor Nickel and Jenny Pham from Lincoln, the applicant. Via Zoom, we have Brian Perkins, the architect, and he's here to answer any questions on architectural issues or design issues that the commission may have. Otherwise, he'll just be observing. In the audience, I have Jason Densmer, civil engineer from the Land Group, and John Ringer, traffic engineer from Kittleson and Associates. And they're here also just to answer questions if you have ones in their areas of expertise. So our goal here tonight is to continue to demonstrate for the commission how the application is a natural outcome of the guidance and the direction provided by the regional transportation and land use planning that the city and the sister agencies with Garden City have been involved with for decades. You have to meet 6 different findings in order to approve this or recommend this application be moved on to city council. And probably the largest one, the biggest one, is that it has to be consistent with the comprehensive plan, including the future land use map. So to begin, this application, just like any rezone application, does have to meet that finding. With our application narrative, we addressed each of the comprehensive plan goals, policies, and objectives to show you how this application was in compliance with the comprehensive plan. Let's focus on the regional and city transportation plans that have evolved and been adopted over the last 20 to 30 years, and that they demonstrate that this project has firm historical grounding and planning guidance from the agencies whose job it is to observe the changes that happen in our communities and plan for the future to protect the public's overall well-being. Since roughly 2000, more than a half dozen local governments and agencies, including Garden City, Boise, ACHD, VRT, ACHD, CCDC, Compass, have been working together to implement the vision for State Street Corridor. This regional planning activity informed Garden City's comprehensive plan, especially in the vicinity of State Street and Pierce Park Lane. The intersection at State and Pierce Park has been formally identified as a secondary TOD node on State Street and is planned for commercial development, higher density housing, and as a bus rapid transit station site. Some people testified at the hearing last month that we were being disingenuous by calling it a transit station. We didn't make up the name. Whatever one calls it, a transit station or a bus stop, the bottom line policy for this city designated Green Boulevard corridor is that the corridor is to be designed with multimodal characteristics to support transportation modes besides vehicles, and that the land uses along the corridor are to be active and they are to be dense to encourage multimodal transportation. Garden City amended its comp plan to support the city's goal for transit along State Street. The city revised its future land use map to identify this property at State and Pierce Park as an activity node, as a neighborhood and destination center. According to the comp plan, and I quote, "The center should be focused on uses that facilitate making the location a destination. Uses may include small scale retail, art, office, and higher density residential." The comprehensive plan on page 15 specifically talked about this property. And I quote again, "In 2018, the 121-acre Plantation Country Club was purchased by a new owner. Future development plans for the property will be affected by the ACHD programmed project to reconfigure Pierce Park Lane and State Street intersection, and it's also affected by the activity node designation on the land use map." That comprehensive plan statement is true. The future development plans of the property owner are affected by both ACHD's reconfiguration of the intersection and the city's designation of the property as an activity node. The property owner, in reliance on the public hearings on the legislative actions of the city, began working with the city and ACHD to reconfigure State Street Pierce Park intersection with a new, safe, signalized south leg to be designed and constructed by the property owner at the property owner's expense. Garden City approved a design review application for the fourth leg. ACHD and the property owner entered into a contract regarding the particulars of construction and also the eventual vacation of Plantation Drive. Turning to one person's testimony about this issue, Mr. Smellick testified last month that he has lived in his house for 29 years and that the R2 zoning has been in place since the 1970s. He incorrectly claimed that the comprehensive plan does not allow high-density housing at this location. This is not correct. The comprehensive plan specifically identifies this area for high-density residential to support the transportation planning that's been going on in our community probably as long as that R2 zoning has existed. As an aside, we all understand under the Local Land Use Planning Act that it does not provide a property owner a guarantee of a zone. As the community changes, as property changes, as community changes, planning changes to address community changes, so too does zoning changes. Do zoning changes occur to address and implement plans? It's been surprising in the testimony last month to hear people say about State Street, well, no one thinks about using State Street for dining. Well, there are already enough businesses on State Street. It's as though some of the residents that live along the river and along the golf course have been unaware of the changes in the greater community and the decades of planning that has gone on to ensure State Street becomes a multimodal corridor serving Garden City and the wider community. We can expect a great deal of activity on State Street. Offers are now being accepted to develop and purchase the ITD site. Boise created an almost 600-acre urban redevelopment district along State Street. The tax increment financing from that district is going to do streetscape improvements, landscape on both the Boise side and the Garden City side of State Street. Both Boise City, ACHD, VRT, Garden City are right to expect that their public planning efforts over these decades will attract significant public-private capital for the State Street corridors redevelopment, including at this location. Garden City, realizing its potential as a vibrant and connected community, and I quote again from the comprehensive plan, said this: Garden City is seeing a new chapter in its evolution as a more urban city. Planning and city investment have set the stage for private development. A more urban city. That's what our comprehensive plan sees. The evolution of Garden City as a more urban city. That means for all of us, we have to consider equitably, fairly, sharing both the benefits and the burdens of our increasingly urban lives. Fairly sharing the benefits and burdens of our increasingly urban lives is how we ensure that often elusive quality of life is there for everyone in the community. The residence at River Club is consistent with the city's comprehensive plan. The project is a direct response to the guidance of the comprehensive plan. So, no matter that Mr. Leroy continues to claim that the project is spot zoning, compliance with the comprehensive plan negates that argument. We've addressed the legal issues in writing, as has the city attorney, and so we won't go further. A few more rebuttal comments in connection with traffic and the use of roads. Hiddleston and Associates submitted a transportation impact study to ACHD based on the master plan and based on the scope of work that ACHD told them to do. Contrary to comments that the traffic from the project cannot be handled by State Street, ACHD found the planned intersection improvements will mitigate impacts. ACHD has provided its recommendations to the city. Garden City included those recommendations with the conditions of approval. All of them are acceptable to the applicant, including the recommendation that there is no vehicular connection to be made to North Fair Oaks Place. There was testimony again tonight suggesting that the project would have no school bus service and that somehow the kids would be forced to hop a fence or maybe swim a river or a canal. That is a bit silly, and it's also incorrect. The district has assured us that the school buses can enter into the residences at River Club and pick up the kids within that project. They do this all the time on public roads through a license agreement, and that's not an issue. And Bob can talk about his conversation with Lynette Dawes at the district if you like. The second finding that you have, says that the SAP application as condition meets the minimum requirements of this chapter. The chapter referenced in finding 2 is chapter 6, Administration of Garden City Code. Code provides that an SAP may be utilized anywhere within the city on properties that would benefit from a master plan and a phasing approach. The city's approved, entertained an SAP on a piece of property, I think on 34th Street, that's 1/2 the size of this application. The code goes on to say an SAP application is encouraged for the development of or redevelopment of properties defined in the comp plan as TOD activity nodes or neighborhood destination activity nodes, which this is, or as future planning areas. Mr. Holler has testified before the commission, repeating the code's definition of where an SAP is appropriate, including the neighborhood activity nodes, and then turned in his testimony around to claim somehow that the code language means an SAP is not appropriate at this location. Perhaps that is just silly. Mr. Holler has also testified before the commission that the open space language on the land use map somehow means that the development application cannot be made for this location because to do so, and I quote, would give unique benefits to a single out-of-state developer. This is not correct. And I could say that this was a silly statement because Mr. Holler may not understand what he is saying, but mostly it is an aggressive statement without benefit of context that attempts to undercut private property rights, but also municipal objectives. During the years past comprehensive hearings, there was an effort by some to put the words open space on both the future land use map and the comprehensive plan for this property, which could have been interpreted to require the one and only private golf course to be taken by the city for public open space. At that time, we spoke about the property owner's concern and the language proposed, and the comprehensive plan language was amended to mirror the long-held public policy that distinguishes between public and private property. At that time, we spoke to say a descriptive label on the future land use map to identify, yes, this is existing open space. That's okay, provided it was very clear that the city recognized that the owner had the right to bring forward a plan development application, and both the commission and the council acknowledged that the property owner, just like any property owner, has the right to bring forward a development application on its property. ACHD, the design review consultants and city staff have recommended conditions of approval. These conditions further assist the city in assure and ensure that the public is protected. The applicant has provided some clarifying comments to the staff, but generally agree with the conditions except for condition 3. Condition 3 said that in part that if the thing that we've presented tonight in response to the request by others that we take away all of phase 3, that review should go back to the design review consultants before going on to the city council, but we wholeheartedly disagree with that. That issue is not a design review issue. They wouldn't have anything to say about this. They recommended that there be connection. I can only imagine they would recommend that again. This is a commission and a council matter. The applicant's proposed adjustment is just in direct response to the extreme proposal to eliminate the entire exhibit 3 or phase 3. And again, from our perspective, if this isn't worthy to pass on to the council, we'll take it off the table. It truly was an attempt to address issues, and it doesn't have to be there. We think we did it. We've caused that disconnect with the lesser amount of ground. Again, we generally agree with the conditions of approval which ensure protection of the public's well-being. As an example, Mr. Bush testified that the application is deficient somehow because water and sewer systems are not completely built today. That's a misleading statement, but it's a good example of why conditions of approval are very much appropriate. Like any project, the infrastructure work is often not completed when an application is made. And like any project, the city will condition the project to require detailed site plans, detailed engineering drawings that their engineers can review, and no building permit will be issued until that condition is met. As another example of ensuring the public's well-being, there has been testimony that the project raises unidentified flood issues, implying that flood or floodplain issues cannot be addressed. This is not true. And the existing city code governs flood hazards and flood hazard ordinance, and that flood hazard ordinance is incorporated verbatim into the proposed SAP district code. Just like any development in Garden City, the city will continue to administer its ordinance and the FEMA regulations to ensure that flood hazards are addressed, just like the rest of the subdivisions in Plantation. Finding number 3 has the SAP application needs to promote orderly planning and development of land as set forth in the process statement. And that purpose statement is outlined at 86B-6A, and it is to create zoning regulations and a master plan for unique areas and developments. The DR consultants and staff provided guidance and conditions of approval. No development of any phase of the project can move forward until site-specific plans are reviewed by the city and all agencies providing public services such as sewer and water, and they approve the plans to ensure there is no adverse impact on delivery of services. Mr. Leroy claims incorrectly that the approval of the concept master plan will somehow prevent public scrutiny for each detailed phase that comes before the city. This is incorrect. The proposed SAP district code does not modify the review procedures of Garden City. It incorporates those procedures in full. Traditional notice and hearing procedures are not eliminated with this rezone. All future applications will be required to go through design review. There will be a final decision issued by the planning official, which decision is appealable to the city council at a public hearing. Mr. Leroy has characterized the site-specific review by the professional staff and the design review consultants and the right of appeal to the council as, and I quote, an abandonment of both traditional commission and council duties and the neighbor's rights. There is no abandonment. This is just not correct. Further, we also have no doubt that our neighbors are going to continue to identify them to you as interested parties who will receive due notice and be able to be heard at any public hearing that there is. And call Jenna and Charlie and at any time. We're looking forward to it. In his testimony last month, Mr. Leroy claimed the land uses proposed with the SAP are already approved. This is not correct. Again, no development application has been filed. This is a conceptual master plan under review. No construction can start on a component except with that detailed design review, conditional use, variance, or subdivision approval consistent with the adopted code. There's a long way to go before there is development. Some people have testified that they are concerned that there will be over 750 units in a 4 to 5 story buildings and it will be underparked. This is incorrect. The application is for a maximum of 750 units. The actual number of units constructed is always going to be governed by the number of parking spaces provided. The concept master plan today shows a little over 1,107 spaces. That would support 700 units. If any additional units were proposed by this applicant, additional parking spaces, likely in the form of parking garage or parking facility, would have to be developed. Some people have not understood the proposed height. The form standards and the SAP code have a maximum retail and multifamily building height of 65 feet and a maximum townhouse height of 35 feet. However, as described in the last presentation and the architect's presentation for the commission, a 4-story multifamily building is approximately 45 feet with appurtenances approximately 8 to 12 feet. In addition to that, townhomes are approximately 29 feet to roof peak with a chimney extending a few feet more. Again, all of those buildings have to go through further design review. The fourth finding that the application will create a district that's identifiable as a distinct area of the city with a distinguishing character. The residence at River Club is a unique opportunity to create a new neighborhood within Garden City along what is taking shape as a much improved east-west corridor for the community. The neighborhood will have close proximities to school, a school bus, the city's library, employment, and shopping. Incorporated within the design is transition in the height and scale, including landscape elements. The compatibility of each phase will be fully vetted with the neighbors, design review professionals, and staff during detailed site plan review. The neighborhood commercial is appropriate in size to the location with direct exit to the transit station or the bus stop. Buildings will be designed to be close to the street with wide sidewalks for displays and outdoor dining. The planned pedestrian-oriented activity center will provide residents with a gathering place for the community. Many of our neighbors and businesses, such as the Chambers of Commerce, have strongly supported the project as a distinct, vibrant area that will provide benefit to Garden City and the wider community. We fully understand that Mr. Leroy and his clients do not consider the proposed project as compatible, especially in this area near North Fair Oaks Place in Charleston. But the proposed landscape buffers the scaled transition from townhomes to multifamily, and the further buffer area shown tonight creates the compatibility and the transition and ensures the goals of the comprehensive plan for the community are achieved. Please consider this. If this area were developed under the existing R2 zone, none of the extensive setbacks and landscape buffers that you see here would be put in place. 5 and 6 are require us to comply with zoning regulation and codes at the effective time of the SAP application, and that finding that the application has been noticed and public hearings been held in accordance with the code. Staff has identified that all of the public notices have been provided. The property was posted according to code for both the P&Z and the council hearings. Your code requires that sign to come down 3 days after a hearing, so that was taken down. But at every hearing, the hearings were continued to a date certain, so the notice is still in effect. However, staff asked if we would, as a courtesy, replace the sign for the city council meeting, and that has happened. We did comply with all the pre-application processes. A complete application has been submitted. Some people, again, are speculating that the application was incomplete because they believe ownership is somehow unknown. This is incorrect, and I hope we're past this. The application contains all of the evidence of ownership. Mr. Leroy has acknowledged that the Ada County Assessor's Office identifies the property as owned by LB River Club owner, the property owner. Likewise, an affidavit of legal interest was provided in the record with the application. Confirmation of delegation of authority to the applicant is on file with the city. Mr. Livingston has accused me of ignoring him about the master declaration, and he's right. It is not applicable in these public proceedings. Dr. Livingston, I think he brought up again tonight, so I just referenced it, has speculated whether the city's SAP code conforms to state code authorizing conditional or special use permits. The Local Land Use Planning Act, Section 676512, which does govern conditional or special use permits, not rezoning, is not applicable. In conclusion, Garden City is realizing its potential as a vibrant and a connected community. That's what Garden City's comprehensive plan embodies, the evolution of Garden City as a more urban city. It's been a bit difficult for us to address so much of the testimony from the April 27th hearing. There were many statements. Some of them may have been meant to be misleading. Others were from people who are unclear about the planning, design, land use, or development process. For these people, perhaps they see change approaching without the context of the decades of planning efforts by the many different public agencies whose job it is to protect public welfare. Without this context, people can be confused, people can get angry. So we are respectfully asking you tonight to recommend approval of this file as being in compliance with the conclusions of law required by the city zoning ordinance. But we're also asking that the commission deliberately deliberate and speak to the findings. If you decide to recommend approval of this application to your council, your deliberation will help people in opposition understand better. If you decide to recommend denial of this application, the Local Land Use Planning Act reminds the commission that it must deliberate and tell the applicant what it must do to gain approval. And with that, I'll stand for questions, or if Bob would like to add anything. Bob is just going to speak.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Bob Taunton. My address is 24654 North Lake Pleasant Parkway, Peoria, Arizona. I know I'm now no longer living in Boise, but I did live here for 18 years. So until last year. I just have a couple of brief comments that I'd like to make. Again, just to emphasize that this is a rezone application. It is not a development application. Having been through these exercises for quite a few years, nearly 5 decades, the public tends to well, we often call it, they're asking for the full meal deal at a rezoning situation. And that's just not how the process works. It's like a funnel. You start very general, and then you drill down, and finally you get to your building permits. And every step of the way, you get more and more detailed. So a lot of the, as Joe indicated, a lot of the commentary about water and sewer and floodplain and that sort of thing, it is not appropriate at this level. The city requires that at the more detailed design level, engineering level. For example, floodplain development permit will be necessary, but that's not necessary at a land use discussion. It's necessary when you actually have the engineering plans in place and you file your floodplain development permit application. Again, we are not proposing access, ped bike access to Fair Oaks. And we thought by making this change here, where we remove property from the SAP geography, from the legal description, that would further demonstrate that we are not supporting that. Apparently, that's not convinced anybody. So one suggestion would be the commission could say, well, we like your plan, but let's keep the SAPD boundary as it is in the application and attach a condition that it should be a 5 or 6 foot high wrought iron fence that would actually can eliminate access to Fair Oaks. That's assuming the commission agrees with the concept of not having access, ped bike access to Fair Oaks. One thing we wanted to remind the commission is the discussion about lot 99 in the Investors Plantation subdivision. There is disagreement as to whether that's publicly accessible as a way to get to the Greenbelt. That is not part of our application. It has no bearing on our application at all. That's an issue between the city and the HOA. So just wanted to remind the commission about that. Boise School District. Okay, it's been portrayed that we are attempting to funnel all of the kids, of which there aren't all that many, that would be generated by this project, down to Fair Oaks so they can get on a bus. Frankly, I didn't know that the bus actually went to Fair Oaks, and I assume it goes into the cul-de-sac, although Mr. Holler could probably correct me on that if not. But we have spoken to Lynette Daw, who is the transportation director for the Boise School District. There are other options. One of them is a bus pullout on State Street. No, we're going to have a transit stop, but that will be in lane. It won't be a bus pullout. There potentially could be a bus pullout for the school bus, assuming that ACHD would support that on State Street. Okay, so that's one option. Second option is for the bus to come in, the extension of Pierce Park, go south. We could create a roundabout at the south end. They could pick up kids, turn around, go back out to State Street. Now that's a private street. And the preference on this for the school district, as you would expect, is they would want to be on public streets, but they do go on private streets. And Lynette said that as long as they had an access agreement and they had an indemnification in case their bus damaged any of the roadway surfaces, that would actually work, because the focus is what's safest for the kids. So that's something that we will explore further. Now, again, in the first phase, if it's active adult, there will be no children. So there'll be no school kids it doesn't generate any school kids. But certainly in the second phase, the central phase, that would be where that would have to be addressed. But if it's not active adult first phase, we'll figure that out. But obviously, if it's going to be Pierce Park and we construct the new entry, we're going to have to design that so that there is the turnaround for the bus. So really, as part of first phase, that solution could be in place. And I was going to go over the parking, but just one more detail on that. The plan, we have a conceptual master plan, and we have an anticipated estimated number of units. And of course, that can vary based on whether they're studios or one bedrooms, because the envelope of the building will only be so big. So how you mix the units will determine how many the type of units, determine how many units will be there. But with 700 units, which is roughly what we're portraying here, because that's what parks on site, there is 1,107 parking spaces, and that turns out to be 1.56, including guest parking, which is very close to, I think, what the proposed code is, which is 1.6. So I'm not sure if that code was actually, it was not adopted. No, okay. So it's still a draft code. But for all of the folks that are claiming that we're underparked and we're going to overwhelm neighboring streets, I don't know how we're going to get to neighboring streets, frankly. But I guess the presumption is that over on Fair Oaks, and Mr. Holler had his neighbors go out and they did this clever sort of video to show all their cars parked around the street, and the school bus couldn't get there. If there's a barrier, there's no possible way that there would be guest parking on Fair Oaks. And that would be the only situation. There certainly wouldn't be guest parking on Charles. There's no way to get through at the end of the cul-de-sac. So with that, Joanne and I will stand for questions.
Okay, thank you. So any questions for the applicant?
Mr. Chairman, I did have some questions, but
Commissioner Brown?
Mr. Chairman, I had a couple of questions, but Ms. Butler answered them, so I won't take any time.
Okay, all right, thank you. Any other commissioners?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question.
Commissioner Shepherd?
Thank you. So I saw your plans about changing this east phase. Is there another plan to put a bike path in, like on the west phase? I thought I saw something about that. We talked about it last time. Like, how would you guys have connectivity to the green belt?
Connect to the green belt?
Yeah.
The only possibility was, in the east end was connecting to Fair Oaks, and we dispense with that. But the connection can be, sorry, I'm not speaking to the mic. The connection can be on State Street. There'll be a multi-purpose pathway that we will construct along the entire frontage, which is about 1,800 feet. So, a good distance. And then there is a sidewalk currently, but there will be an extension of the multi-purpose pathway in the next phase of development on State Street by ACHD. And that will get you to North Plantation River Drive. And then that would get you down to Lot 99. If that isn't publicly accessible to the greenbelt, then you would have to continue to the west and find the next access point, public street that connects into a connection to the greenbelt.
A follow-up question. So forgive me, there was like 1,000 pages of documents to review, but I know I saw something, or we talked about it last time, where they showed on the map like another alternative. Is that not part of a plan now? It was,
Oh, was that from Mr. Snowden by any chance?
I don't know.
Okay.
I was just wondering if that was still an option.
It was never an option. His idea was to make some sort of connection over to the west end of the golf course and go through the golf course, which is just not feasible from a safety standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Montoya, questions for the applicant?
No further questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate your time. We'll hear from staff now on some, well, we'll just hear from staff now.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the commission. As staff provided a presentation previously, I am available for questions or clarifications for any items that may have come up. Certainly, there are a couple of items that I suspect that the commission may or may not wish to hear from related to any changes in staff's perspective. But with that, I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Any questions for staff?
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Brown.
I do have a question for Jenna. I think it will be an important issue. I think it sort of is. And it has to do with you propose this, and I want to point out it was incorrectly stated. I won't say by who, implying that in some way the draft proposal for a decision was in some way advocating certain things or recommending, and I don't read it to say that. It's just what it says right in the thing. It has both conditions that would be put in there if we recommend approval or if we recommend denial. And I want to point that out, but it does have to do with that document. And it has to do if we entertain the proposed change, let's call it a change to the east parcel, the most recent revision, then the possibility of a bicycle connection or pedestrian connection to Fair Oaks would not be in there if we went along with this latest adjustment. And in the proposed draft, it still had a requirement that in sense less to see what we used to call when you put a road in that development as some kind of a stub out or some potential connection at some future date. That was in the red line version, which you identified that we could consider in our considerations. That was recommended by the developer, I think by Ms. Butler, that be eliminated. That possibility for some future. I would like Janet to address what was really specifically meant by the way it was originally drafted, and then what the draft that's in there, making note that it's not a recommendation, it's just a possibility. I would like for you to clarify that, please.
Chairman, Commissioner Brown, thank you. And certainly Commissioner Brown did state that correctly. In the original proposal where that east subdistrict was proposed to be directly adjacent to Fair Oaks Place, for a number of reasons, staff, including the design review recommendations from the city of Boise, ACHD, et cetera, had suggested a connection to the public street, Fair Oaks, for pedestrians, bicycles and pedestrians. That's the reasoning behind that is noted on page 25 of the staff report, not the amendment, but the staff report that was before you last month. discussing that the speeds that individuals would be subject to on State Street where nearly 79% die, or there's an AIS 4 or greater injury. Whereas the local streets, the public streets, including Fair Oaks Place, the speeds would be only 2 to 5% would die. So there's a huge differential if pedestrians hit in those locations. And so identifying connections that are safe, also called out in a number of plans ranging from ACHD, City of Boise, Garden City planning documents throughout the years. And also noting on page 34 of the comp plan that the Garden City comp plan, or page 34 of the staff report, excuse me, the comprehensive plans, goal 7 and goal 8 to connect the city and maintain a safe city. With the applicant's proposal to push that additional acre back, staff did suggest amending the draft condition in the affirmative. So if you choose to make a recommendation for approval, to create that stub out for a future potential connection, not requiring that pedestrian connection to that public Fair Oaks Place at this time. But should and when the golf course is redesigned, there would be the potential that there would be that connection to that public street at that point in time. And again, I know that not tonight, but previously it was noted as a vehicular connection, and the staff report has never contemplated that, except for in the very beginning, prior to having ACHD's comments on whether or not there could be adequate left-hand turn movements onto State Street for vehicles. And so, and then Chairman, if I may, Commissioner Brown also brought up a good point. The draft conditions of approval or decision documents are the Planning and Zoning Commission's document. And so it's drafted in the affirmative, should you recommend approval, and also in denial, should you recommend denial, as a starting base for discussions for you to through this process.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay. Any other questions for your staff? Okay. All right. So what we'll do now, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. And we'll take a short recess. And then we'll pick back up at 19, we'll just say 1920. Thank you very much. Great.
Gamble, gamble. Okay, I'll get through it.
Oh, it worked. Attorney recommendation.
I don't think.
All right, thank you, everyone. Okay, so the next step in the flow here is deliberations between the commission members on this application. Commissioner Montoya, any thoughts to start us off?
Thank you, Chairman, and I'd like to thank the public for being here. I know that it can be hard to get up and talk through this, and especially with this in your backyard, and also appreciate the applicant and the presentations and that information. So thank you for everyone being here in your testimony, because it really does help us. And from my perspective, I need to look at the code and make the recommendations, if there are recommendations, based on my interpretation of the code and for the community, and not just the members of your subdivision and the plantation, but also Garden City and so forth. So, you know, where I went to first on this is really looking at some of the areas within the comp plan. The activity node being one of those, and I heard the testimony on some of the discussion on whether or not that's part of the activity node or not. And within the comp plan on page 38, it does call State Street and Pierce Park as a neighborhood and destination center. So I think about that as what was the intent of the drafters of the comp plan, and that brings me to, there was some decision at some point where that was designated to be an activity node. Now, when we get into some of the comp plan as well, and I think about neighborhood and destination centers, I go to what's safe. Is there areas within the plan to allow for neighborhood activities, the public to come and gather? And that's where I've had questions on the applicant and the application, is that, is this intended to be for the public, or is this intended to be further for the club and for a private development? And so at the last meeting, I asked questions specifically regarding the use of the pathways and other areas. And I hear a little bit of a disagreement from both sides, where there doesn't want to be a connection to the Fair Oak side. And there is also some distinction between limiting the opening of some of those other pathways from the public and having it shut down at certain times. So this makes me question whether or not it really is an activity node and a public destination, or whether this is just catering to the development itself. Additionally, I have a 6-year-old, and I can only imagine, even if it is an older community, that grandparents are going to have kids and other people are going to have kids, and it does need to promote activity and use. The golf club, in my mind, is used for people to go out and recreate, and that's still the potential for the open space. But if that's completely closed down, then it could potentially restrict use and by the public, not just for members of the community, but also for children and other folks that want to go to the retail and go to the commercial. And so that's one of my concerns, is just the lack of potential alternative activities for kids or other folks, as well as just the safety of the subdivision. There's 700 people that are proposed, or units, and I don't know the exact numbers because it doesn't sound like it's final, but there's going to be a lot of traffic in there. And whether it's a recommendation or a denial, would be that the applicant really focuses on studying pathways for everybody. And if there are older community members within there, it's still going to affect them just like it would kids or people that might not be paying attention to the traffic. And that's a lot of vehicles in and out of that subdivision. So, you know, safety wise, that's certainly concerning for me. And I want to make sure that there's areas where pathways are identified and it's easy for vehicles to see around corners, and you have the the triangles and so forth, so. That's another concern. The bus stop for me, I asked that question last month. That is something that I consider to be very important. Especially if the community doesn't want the connectivity to Fair Oaks, there needs to be somewhere where kids can go to get onto the bus safely. I can only imagine that if you have a high density multifamily environment, you're gonna have members of the public that are gonna be using that from all age ranges and including family members and with kids. So I would say that that would be extremely important for me to consider as trying to resolve that. And I did hear from the applicant that it does sound like that's possible and not something that was being ignored, which I appreciate. Thank you. And then I did hear about the bus stop and having a turn in, and it seems like that would be potentially important as well to alleviate some of the traffic on State Street if there was the opportunity to work with ACHD to have a turn in or some way to not back up additional traffic. If that is truly a transportation node and anticipating bus stops in that area being used as a major stop area. So with the activity node, those are my comments in regards to that area. And then also looking at some of the other areas like the Green Boulevard corridor, I do see, and I would say that some of the explanations and the discussion in the Green Boulevard corridor are addressed within the application. And then also the future planning area. And while the future planning area may not specifically say this area, I do see that there are similarities to the areas that it does point out. And that is the ITD space, the ACHD, and as well as some of the others that are designated for future planning areas. So when I look at these situations, and some of the code that we're looking at, especially within 8-6B, and whether it aligns with the goals and the objectives of the city's comprehensive plan, I do see that there are applications and it is cohesive in certain areas with that plan. As I mentioned before, I do have concerns with some of the safety components where it talks about provide a safe and comfortable integrated transportation system, which prioritizes the pedestrian, bicyclist environment and mass transit and reduces vehicle trips. So if there is a way that the applicant can work just to make sure and ensure that there is safe ways to travel, that does seem to meet that part of the plan as well. I talked about the community, including public access. And then also social, economic, environmental sustainability to the city. I like State Street a lot and I use State Street a lot. And I do spend time in restaurants and other facilities on State Street. So for me to accept the argument that people won't go there, or maybe it's going to be some other type of demographic that go there, that doesn't couple with me. So I find that area to be amazing and I would like to see it promoted, and seems to be that could be an area that has potential growth and can be an area that people recreate and use. So those are some comments that I have, but I would like to hear from the other commissioners before I make a recommendation.
Okay, Commissioner Brown, what are your thoughts?
Okay, I put a lot of thought in this. I think this is an important thing. I think there've been some suggestions in some way that we need more time. I don't believe so. And I think we've had plenty of time. I can categorically say, I read every single thing that was submitted. I spent over 100 hours on reviewing this application. And I think that we should proceed and make a recommendation to the council. Within that, I think that this particular area, it's appropriate that it have a master plan of some kind and not be subject the east little minor area in it being developed differently. Or even if you left it under the current zoning. And from my perspective, this is a good plan. And it serves the purpose. And I think an SAP in this particular area is more than appropriate. I actually have I'll try to go as fast as I can, but I have about 10 different items that I've sort of left it out. I think we need to be thinking about. That's the first one. The second item, we heard a lot of opposition, including people I personally know and I think a lot about. And what most the opposition wants, in fact, I would say almost 100%. They would like us to some way make it so it doesn't change. Our little community where we live continues to be the golf course as it now is. But I don't believe that we have the power to do that. And in that regard, we don't have the power to make this a public open space. The part of it that's the golf course is a private golf course. And it's not a park. It's not going to become a park. So I don't think that we have the power to affect that. So that gets us back to this application. So the third point, as has been pointed out, this is very much supported by the 2021 revised comprehensive plan. And the incorporation of that in the plan goes back to 2004. When we adopted, and I had quite an active bit with putting together the 2004 State Street Corridor Strategic Plan Study. And it resulted in all of the cities, ACHD, ITD, Eagle, Garden City, approved what was put in there, and what it concluded was that the populace that got to vote supported the bus rapid transit plan for being the way that we in our community would develop State Street. That was actually put into effect in the 2006 Garden City Comprehensive Plan, which included a so-called TOD, transportation-oriented development at State Street and Pierce Park in the 2006. That was then codified further 2011 by the ACHD and Valley Ride Regional Transit Plan, which was developed on State Street, which was signed on to and approved by Garden City. And that subsequent to that, the ACHD and Valley Regional Transit Plan, which was also amended in 2019, 2021, and approved by Garden City. And that was approved, and it was already pointed out, so I'm not going to read it again to you, in the 2021 plan, which said State Street and Pierce Park was indicated as an activity node, and we've already had a bunch of discussion about what the implication of that was. But the implications were that it supported much higher density in that particular area, consistent with the other parts that are already taking place on State Street in Boise City across the street from this development. And you go up and down State Street. And it was also pointed out, they just recently have opened up the old ITD property, which I guarantee you what is going to go put in there will be consistent with the plan for State Street. I probably shouldn't guarantee it, but I would be surprised if it doesn't. Now, the fifth issue has to do with the applicability of the CCNRs. I think that was for the Plantation Master Association. Now, I cannot say prior to 1992 how, if the golf course was subject to any of those CCNRs and master declaration. but I can categorically tell you that it has not been since 1992. Because I've been on the board of directors for the Plantation Master Association. And no time in all of that time was it ever suggested that golf course parts of the development were subject to those CCNRs. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't tell you what they might say, but I will tell you that the people that were on the directors were the directors of the Master Association. Never, ever contemplated that that property was subject to our CCNRs. Then we get to the issue of connectivity of bicycle and pedestrians. The allocation that was taken care of by ACHD. It is a public street. ACHD are the people that control access to Fair Oaks. They did recommend in their recommendation for the pedestrians and bicycles under the way the third phase was originally going to be developed. And it made a lot of sense, and it is consistent with our comprehensive plan. We have required other developments across the river in the last 5 or 6 years. There are numerous of them that have been required to make connections to the Greenbelt. And we cite it as being part of the comprehensive plan. So I thought that was a pretty good idea for a lot of reasons. And as already pointed out, it probably isn't proper to talk about the issue of lot number 99, so I won't do that tonight. But when it was put in there and the draft purpose of it, that was consistent with supporting what we have required other developers to do. In that regard, if we decide, and my inclination is to proceed, and the developers recommended that be changed and take that 1 acre out. And my feeling is that we should go along with what he has requested that we do. But I do think, just as was pointed out by Jenna, and she did a good job of explaining why it was put in there. I believe in our recommendations when we're just making recommendations, that be a requirement, that at least we can leave it stubbed out. In other words, leave the possibility that the pathways that are interior to this development at some point in time, if development takes place that enabled it, that you would open that up, provide just for the reasons that was already mentioned. It does provide for connectivity to the Greenbelt and the public streets that are adjacent to this, or that were going to be. Now they're not any longer. They're not adjacent. They do have that piece of the golf course in there, but I would recommend, in my opinion, we should leave that as a requirement if we make a recommendation for approval. And now, as long as I'm talking about things we should leave in, I think we should leave in the request, the recommendation for a requirement for the legal department to review and approve the issue on the ownership issue. I've been satisfied to me, but I think we're remiss if we don't leave that as a recommended condition in there and let the city council decide specifically whether that has to be done. And I think we ought to support that by recommending it. I'm not implying that I don't think that it has been resolved. I really think it has been. The parking issue, that's number 8. There's no objective way, in my knowledge or studies, that tells you exactly how many parking places there ought to be. Think about when we were discussing in this very board the current revision to the parking regulations. And I really respect him. I did disagree with him, but you might remember that the chairman was of the opinion we might even think about not having any requirements. And since he said that, it prompted me to do a little research, and there's actually quite a bit of body of thought that way. In other places, they're actually trying that. I don't believe, I still don't believe that we should, but I will say there's not an objective way you can really say it's just got to be 1.6 or whether it's 1.5 or it's 2, the way it used to be in our, and I guess it still is in our current regulation. And given that, I'm satisfied that what they put up so far, what they're doing, it will support, as near as I can understand it, about 700 housing units that would be as part of this development. So the parking thing, I think we should just leave it like it is and not try to get it down any further. Mr. Tossin did a really good job of explaining why I don't think the floodplain thing is an issue. He put it exactly right. Every one of these developments will have to come in and will have to go through the city's requirements to, if you're doing construction in the floodplain. And most of the people sitting out here in this audience, including myself, our houses are in the floodplain. And more of our houses are going to be in the floodplain when we get the issue resolved. That right now we're in an exclusion zone. It's the only reason why a whole bunch of us aren't already in the 100-year floodplain, because nobody could certify that levy that we're behind over there. Until that's certified, we may be on paper, as far as FEMA is concerned, we're not in the 100-year floodplain, but let me tell you, categorically we are. So they're going to be required to do that. So I guess there were only 9 and not 10. So in my thoughts, I'm supportive of the application, and I'm supportive of the requirements of the way they've been written. With the exception, I think we should leave those 2 that I already mentioned. Those should be left in there. And I'm in favor of letting the applicant go ahead and carve off the 1 acre on the east end there, like it is. And I guess I said too much.
No, and actually, just a real quick point of clarification, just for specificity's sake, which 2 items should need to stay in the draft conditions of approval specifically?
There are 2 of them. Actually, one of them has got 2 places where it's addressed, and that has to do with what I asked Jenna to explain, that having to do where we would leave it stubbed out. That's not the language, but that's what the intent is, so that in the future, if there's some way developed on the golf course, where there was some kind of an agreement they could do with that, you have the potential of putting that path for pedestrians and bicycles.
So 11A.
Yeah, and the issue of cars and those things, that is not an issue. ACHD has already said that's not an issue, that it won't happen. So that doesn't have to be there. The other one is the language requiring review and approval of ownership.
Yeah.
With regard to the legal department.
And Chairman, just one point of clarification. I think everybody's on the same page, but my presumption is that Commissioner Brown is speaking to the applicant's proposed red line to the. draft
Yes,
decision
No, good
document.
clarification. Thank you, Jenna. Okay.
Well, excuse me, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman. With regard to that, and I would really think that you might want to ask Jenna to agree. All of the other redlined applications, most of them, I don't think that I don't personally have an issue with any of them. But I would recommend before we finish, that you ask Jenna about that.
Yeah, so I wanted to go through and get everybody's thoughts and then parse through that document after that. So whether that was right or wrong, but that was kind of my approach. So Commissioner Shepherd, and thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, everybody. I really appreciated all of the time you guys put into your comments. There were some that were very detailed and well thought out, and to the applicant also just how you broke everything down. It made it easy for me to, well, easy in the sense that it's a lot to have to try to like put together. And I really see both sides. I've heard from the people that are in favor of this application for keeping the golf course. And I really feel the compelling arguments there, and as well as the people who are opposed to it, especially the people living in North Fair Oaks. I understand like the what people have there, and I too have just spent a lot of time and read every letter and trying to really understand, do my best to listen and understand all of the different issus. To me, it's evident that the applicant has made many good faith accommodations with the changes. The new east parcel revision does allow more buffer than even an R2 zoning, which it's been brought up that could be an issue if somebody wanted to come in and develop it as R2. As far as the comprehensive plan goes, the thing that kept coming up to me was like bicycle pedestrian connectivity. That just seemed to be like the main factor that I kept seeing come up over and over again. It seems to be one of the biggest issues. And I support that they took off this extra acre to try to give more of a buffer for the people on North Fair Oaks Place. I feel at some point there needs to be like a connectivity to the green belt. We're going to have, I feel like State Street's going to be kind of dangerous for people to go down. And if there's going to be 750 units and all of the people living there, as we grow denser, there will be more people riding bikes, and that's the idea for the future, is to have less vehicle traffic. So, but I would support just leaving it as is right now and not having the connectivity, but with the potential for a future connection. Just because we have Boise City, Garden City, Ada County Highway District, all recommending that stay in there, because that's the goal for the larger community, is to have that connectivity. And we have that bridge coming in the future. And I'd really like to see, I feel like we didn't talk a whole lot about diversity of housing. I know that there's different kinds of units from studio up to 3-bedroom, I believe. And then there's like different sorts, like the townhouses and the apartments. But I'd really like to see mixed income units, but I think that might be a topic for, like, right now, it's not so much part of the SAP. That would be more for a future conversation. I feel like we are in desperate need of workforce housing. And I think any developer coming in with 750 units needs to have some variation there. And I don't mean from a studio to a 3-bedroom. I mean like a 3-bedroom and 3-bedroom having different price ranges. And I think there's ways to do that, but again, that might be a future conversation. I thought maybe there were other options for connectivity. I really wanted to stay away from the North Fair Oaks lane. But I think that's what we are doing right now. If we go ahead and recommend this to the city council, so we would leave it for the future possibility. We don't know if that'll ever happen, but I think that there needs to be that option. I think the other commissioners have hit on most of the things. Just I don't have it broken down as far as like in my mind, as far as like the draft decision, other than what I've already discussed, but I didn't think too much into the ownership. I mean, I think to me, that's obvious, like you have to own the property in order to develop it. But I know it's a lot more complicated than that. I did read the legal brief that one of you wrote about that. And I think that's all I have for right now.
Okay. So I guess my initial thoughts are, and I guess first I'll start with thanking you all for being here and being just really part of this process. I think Commissioner Brown said it and Commissioner Montoya maybe too, but that it does help and it helps us, keeps us grounded in our considerations. You know, what's all on your mind. So I appreciate that. And I also appreciate that it's tough to get up in front of a room and talk. And so thanks for all that. And also, I guess, just an acknowledgement of how much of a change this is for people for y'all that live in that community. Also, thanks to the commissioners and staff for their incredible diligence with this application. Commissioner Brown talking about considering or working on this for 100 hours, I think he said. And I know the other commissioners spent a ton of time too. And I know staff has really worked hard with this application. And so anyway, thanks to everybody for this. As far as my thoughts on this, I think as Commissioner Montoya said, so that's one of the great things about going last is I don't have to, I can piggyback off some of the other comments, but basically what I really try to do on all these applications is just consider how the application aligns with Garden City Code. And how that applies to the whole city. And so as I reviewed the application and its alignment with the comprehensive plan and all these other issues that are important, there were times where I had questions in my mind and they've been answered since then, and more consideration. I have come to the conclusion that I think that this application aligns actually pretty well with our comprehensive plan. So I'm actually excited about this application and this project. So I will be recommending that we hand a recommendation to approve over to City Council. The last thing I just wanted to say was about the phase 3 updates that we got, that we received as part of this. The way I looked at it was, that's what it is. So I'm not even considering the older plan. The application we have in our hands right now is for that 1 acre to be given back to the golf course. So that's where my mind is on that. So that said, I'd like to maybe shift the discussion over to the applicant's redlined document, and just to make sure that if there's anything on there that we want to agree with or leave in there, take off as far as what the applicant submitted. I'll just throw my 2 cents in first, since I am going through this right now. Is I always also default to what staff crafts with regard to our draft conditions of approval. And certainly we have made some changes in these hearings to some of the draft conditions of approval on different applications, but I always really do default to what they're trying to accomplish in the draft conditions of approval. So that said, I really think that 3, 4, and 5 need to stay in as staff had drafted. And I agree with what Commissioner Brown said about 11A. And I'll transition to anybody else if they have other thoughts on some of these other red lines in there. Those were the initial thoughts I had. Mr. Brown, any thoughts?
If that summarized the rest of those, yeah, I agree with you. So I think you, Mr. Chairman, I think you're agreeing with what I said. If you
Yes.
look through the original thing, if you did what I was recommending, and this is what you just said, okay, then we would leave the requirement in there as written for number 11A,
Yeah.
right? There was another thing that I also was gonna point out, which I didn't, but I will for this. I will make sure that it's also noted in there, there were some issues raised about vacating a Plantation Drive. That's a requirement of the highway district, and it certainly is something that it should stay in there, okay? So that should stay. And then the other requirement that I said that should stay in there is on page it's number 4, potential conditions. Documentation of legal ownership shall be approved by the Garden City Legal Department prior to rezoning of property. And there might be something else that alludes to it also later on. I think they should stay in there, definitely.
Okay.
I think you're saying you'd agree. there.
Yep, yep.
Right.
Yep, I would.
Okay, right.
Commissioner Montoya or Shepherd?
I don't have anything further.
Okay,
Neither do I. Chairman.
okay. Okay, so I actually have a question for you then, Jenna. Whenever we come to our motion, do we have to, what do we have to specify with regards to the draft conditions of approval?
Chairman, if you would please specify, and you already have, if you agree with the two commissioners that have provided the recommendations for what needs to stay, that the draft conditions of approval in the affirmative, as that's looks like the way that this discussion is going, be adopted to include the red lines as proposed by the applicant, with the exception of those that were identified. And then also another, just a clarification, staff is understanding that that's just the red lines, not the explanation that have been provided in the box.
Yeah, thanks for that clarity. So yeah,
Yeah, that's right. That's correct.
yeah.
And then Chairman, just for the record, and I should have done this when you called me up for any questions, to if you could please, in your deliberations, address whether or not the change tonight would be considered substantial or not. Title 8, Garden City Code Title 8 does not give a specific direction. However, the subdivision code within Title 8 does provide some criteria for substantial compliance. And staff has provided that document in front of you all tonight. It's not a document, it's code that's found in Garden City Code regarding subdivisions, substantial compliance, and that could be guidance, whether or not the materials that were amended tonight are in substantial conformance, I guess, the opposite of substantial, or substantial compliance with the initial submittal.
Okay, thank you for that guidance as well. Commissioner Brown.
Mr. Chairman, Jenna, you're not suggesting that we put the in there, but we just should make reference to that some way, and we ought to have as part of the motion that this would fulfill the requirements of substantial compliance as now defined, right?
Chairman, Commissioner Brown, that's correct. Just that the changes tonight that were reviewed as part of the master plan, that additional acre, aren't constituting a substantial change to the application
So it doesn't have to be part of the motion. We just have to decide.
in your
Yeah,
deliberations.
and then if we decide that it is substantial, well, then we might suggest that we don't recommend it if we decide it.
Chairman, I may bring Mr. Wadums into this discussion and to assist me a little bit, but what that would mean in the proceedings, if you were to determine that that was a significant change to the application, whether or not tonight would remedy that, or if there would need to be additional proceedings.
Mr. Chair, is the question whether this is a significant change, and if it is, what we do about it?
Yes, and Jenna's point that we need to deliberate about the substantialness of tonight's change.
I think deliberation probably wouldn't help for the record. I think if it is a significant change, then potentially it has to go back. If it's not a substantial change or a significant change, I think you can proceed here tonight.
Right. Okay. So, Commissioner Brown, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I reviewed this and thank Jenna for providing it. I'm of the opinion, well, I already mentioned, I think we've had enough information and we can make a recommendation to proceed. And in saying that, I'm saying that after looking at this, that I would not consider it a substantial change.
And we'll just go down the line here. I'll say second that I agree with Commissioner Brown.
I agree.
I agree.
Okay, all right. Okay, any other deliberations on the draft conditions of approval, or if not, I suppose we're ready to make our motion.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Brown.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend approval to the City Council of SAP FY 2023 #1, River Club Specific Area Plan. A specific area plan for 22.68 acres located at 6515 West State Street. And to include the draft decision document, including the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and conditions of approval. And that conditions of approval include the red line changes that were submitted by the applicant, with the exception of in other words, we will leave these in as they were drafted by the staff. The requirement for a potential connection of the pathway to North Fair Oaks Place. And that particular one, so that Jenna knows where it is, as already mentioned. It's requirement number 11. It's part of the subparcel 11. All right. And also specifically leaving in requirement number 4, which reads documentation of legal ownership shall be approved by the Garden City Legal Department prior to rezoning of the property. I think that's it. Okay.
And then I think 5 as well.
Yes, 5 goes along with that. Okay. Yes, that would be correct. Okay.
maker or chairman, maker of the motion in the discussions, and number 3 was also discussed.
All right, well, that's correct. That would have to be.
Yeah.
So that would be good. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Jenna. Okay, thank you, Commissioner Brown, for your motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. For those in favor, to recommend approval to city council, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Any other discussion on that one? Okay. Thank you again for everybody's participation in this. I am going to also go back to our consent agenda and reopen that. The applicant for our CUP has arrived.
Okay.
So we're gonna address our first item on the agenda tonight as well. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
You too. Okay, we'll go back to our new business item this week, which was CUP FY 2023-7. It's a conditional use permit. Bill Kearns with Wine Barn LLC is requesting a warehousing, storage, and wholesale use located at 115 East 33rd Street in the C2 General Zoning District. So, sir, from time to time, we will put some applications on our consent agenda. If the application is complete, totally complete, and there's no one that wants to provide public testimony. So I'll go through that process right now. I got several questions to ask, and one of them is for you. So we'll see how we do here. So is there anyone in the audience who would like to give public testimony on this item again, which is CUP FY 2023-7? Okay. No one raised their hand. Is the applicant present? Please state your name for the record, please.
William John Kearns.
Okay. Have you had the opportunity to review the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and draft decisions, including the draft conditions of approval?
Yes.
Okay. Do you agree and consent to these documents in the affirmative, including all conditions of approval?
Yes.
All right. Does staff or any member of the commission have any reason that they feel this item should be heard? Okay. That was a no? Okay. All right. So I think we're good. We can, I don't know, do we need to re-motion our consent agenda and all that? Okay. Okay.
So you're amended.
Yeah.
Probably you have to make the motion amended.
Yep. Okay, so let's do that. So our consent agenda now contains, again, the approval of minutes from April 27, and now the approval of CUP FY 2023-7.
Chairman, just to remind everybody, the original maker of the motion was Commissioner Montoya, who seconded by Commissioner Brown.
Okay.
I move for approval of the consent agenda with the approval of the minutes from the April 27th, 2023 meeting, as well as moving item CUP FY 2023-007 conditional use permit to the consent agenda.
Okay, there's our motion. Second.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion has been seconded. All those in favor, aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. You're approved.
Don't go out. Don't go.
Okay. Real quick, I'll just ask, do we have anything from staff else to discuss?
Chairman, none.
Okay, any other discussion items, Mr. Wadums or the commission?
Not from your legal department, no.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
We're adjourned. So this is. You want to turn that off?